morning, good morning. Merry stupid o'clock, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels, and this morning we're doing something a little bit different. It is to just give you some context here. But before we get into that, we are going to go through a few quick usual disclaimers. So, folks, you are going to find the link to this article right there in the description box. Along with the other pertinent links to the Stop the Shocks campaign, including Autistic Hoya's massive archive on the subject, the templates. People, I don't have to tell you. Literally, click on it, sign your name, click on your senator. If you haven't done it yet, I don't know what your excuse is. We talk about it every single video, all right? Okay. We also have the ever-present and self-explanatory Change.org Shut the Judge Rotenberg Center Down petition. Now, when we are speaking about the JRC, trigger warning, you're going to hear vivid descriptions of and catch clips or surveillance footage of people with disabilities being tortured and abused. If you have young children present, please, folks, go ahead and use your headphones, all right? Cool. Okay. It is 3:28 a.m. stupid o'clock in the morning, folks. Not only that, but I was tired and cranky by the end of my shift yesterday, and I was in no means in any mood to go and replace my kava. So that means this morning I am completely out of kava tea. Yeah. It's going to be an interesting day. So, folks, if I stumble over my words or I get incredibly pissed off and just rain down explicitives, my apologies, folks, in advance. All right? So, what do I mean by context this morning? Well, I was going to do a completely different article for you this morning, but I pulled up my Twitter a little bit earlier, about around an hour or so after I first woke up, and I received this through Twitter from someone who's been following my JRC coverage for a good long while now. And what it is some issues, a fatal police encounter with a police taser. Now, why am I going through this article? For context. Remember, a police taser runs on 4 to 5 milliamps. The GED 4A, what they use to shock disabled people, runs on 45. The GED 3 runs about 15. And I believe the very, very few who are still on first generation, it is at least about 10 milliamps. So I want you to think about that while we go through this article in regards to police tasers, all right? Okay, so let's go through it here. A 911 plea for help, a taser shot, a death, and the mounting toll of stun guns. Keeping this in mind, all right? Part 1. In the most detailed study ever of fatalities and litigation involving police use of stun guns, Reuters finds more than 150 autopsy reports citing tasers as a cause or contributor to deaths across America. Behind the fatalities is a sobering reality. Many who die are among society's vulnerable, unarmed and in psychological distress and seeking help. Ontario, California. As her husband stalked around the backyard, upending chairs and screaming about demons, Nancy Schrock knew he was unraveling fast. She dialed the police. He needs to be in the hospital, she told a 911 dispatcher. It was 10:24 p.m. on a Thursday in June 2012. He's really, really, really bad. Tom Schrock had struggled with depression and occasional drug problems throughout their 35-year marriage. and his manic episodes had grown more fierce since their oldest child died 3 years earlier of a heroin overdose. Police had visited the family's ranch style house east of Los Angeles more than a dozen times. Typically, Tom was taken to the hospital, medicated, and sent home after 72 hours. Not this time. 3 officers answered the call, categorized the dispatcher as a disturbance involving an unarmed man with mental health issues. Nancy took them through the house to the back. Santiago Mota, a veteran cop, drew his taser. As officers came out the back door, Tom strode toward them, arms at his side, hands closed. They ordered him to stop, but kept coming, muttering, "Get out." Mota fired the taser. Tom buckled, then retreated into the yard. Mota followed, pressed the electric stun gun to Tom's chest, and fired again. The 57-year-old collapsed, gasping, unresponsive. He never regained consciousness. "I called for help," Nancy said. "I didn't call for them to come and kill him." The San Bernardino County coroner labeled the cause of Schrock's death multifactorial, ruling Tom died from a lack of oxygen to the brain due to cardiac arrest following law enforcement intervention. First among the contributing causes, use of a taser. The Schrocks and Ontario Police and the weapon manufacturer Taser International Incorporated. They contended the stun bleh, excuse me. They contended the stun guns were inherently dangerous and accused the department of failing to properly train officers on the risks of using weapons on people with mental health problems. The city settled for $500,000. The case against the taser was dismissed in June. Both sides declined to say whether there was a settlement. As thousands of police forces across America have embraced tasers, the outlines of the Schrock case have grown familiar. A taser shot, an unintended death, a damage claim. But the episode mentions a mentally ill victim, a complex death investigation, a debate over the weapon's use, tell a deeper story. Tom Schrock's death is one tragedy in a larger constellation of fatalities involving tasers explored by Reuters and a first-of-its-kind examination of deaths and lawsuits, including the stun guns. Reuters documented 1,005 incidents in the United States in which people died after police stunned them with tasers, nearly all since the early 2000s, the most through accounting to date of fatal encounters involving the paralyzing stun guns. Many of casualties are among society's vulnerable. A quarter of the people who died, like Schrock, were suffering from a mental breakdown or neurological disorder. In 9 of every 10 incidents, the deceased was unarmed. More than 100 of the fatal encounters began with a 911 call for help during a medical emergency. It's impossible to know precisely what role the tasers played in many of the deaths documented by Reuters. A review of more than 400 of the fatal encounters, those which documents provide a relatively detailed account of what happened, indicate that tasers were the only form of force allegedly used by the police in about 1 in 4 of the cases. The rest involved both tasers and other forms of force. Most independent researchers who studied the weapons agree deaths are rare when tasers are used properly. But the probability of dying from a taser shock in a police encounter may be incalculable, researchers say, citing a lack of official data on the stun gun use, the fact that deaths often have more than one cause, and other complexities. No government agency tracks fatalities in police incidents where tasers are used. Autopsies are not public in some states, and coroners and medical examiners varying standards to assess a taser's role in a death. The language of their rulings ranges from detailed and rigorous to thin and opaque. Against that curtain of uncertainty, Tasers International has insisted for years that its weapons are almost never to blame when someone dies after being stunned. Doesn't that sound familiar, JRC? Almost always, the company says those deaths result from drug use, underlying physiological conditions such as heart problems or other police force used along with the taser. Of course, we're going to blame the victims. Tell me, do you operate off the JRC hotline? The company asserts that only 24 people have ever died from tasers, 18 from fatal head or neck injuries and falls caused by a taser strike, and 6 from fires sparked by the weapon's electrical arc. Not a single person, the manufacturer says, has died from the direct effects of the taser's powerful shock to the heart or body. Really? Really? Official records suggest otherwise. Reuters obtained many autopsy findings for 712 of the 1,005 deaths it documented. In 153 of those cases, or more than a fifth, the taser was cited as a cause or contributing factor in the death, typically as one of the several elements triggering the fatality. Most of the other autopsies cited a combination of heart medical conditions, drug use, and various forms of trauma. The deaths pose a challenge for U.S. law enforcement at a time when protests over police killings have spurred cities to seek safer ways to control combative subjects. The taser, a weapon nearly universally embraced since the early 2000s as an alternative to firearms, is widely seen as crucial to safer policing. About 90% of America's roughly 18,000 police agencies now use tasers. Issues, but we'll just say. Tasers fire two darts connected to the stun gun by thin wires. When the dart hits a target, a pulse current triggers a paralyzing neuromuscular response that gives police several seconds to restrain the subject. The gun can also be pressed directly against the body, the drive stun mode, causing intense pain but without the dart's paralyzing effects. Well, that's just horrible. That pressed against the body with the pain. JRC. The same. The taser caused my whole body to lock up, and the pain would compare to a whole body Charlie horse, Salt Lake County Deputy Sheriff Tiana Bruce once testified. I felt like I was going to suffocate. Independent studies have found that when used properly, tasers lower the rate of injury incurred by both police and the people they confront. The company estimates its weapons have been deployed more than 3 million times in the field. Taser keeps its own log of daily incidents involving the signature stun guns, which it declined to share. Yes, your records aren't tainted at all by your bias. The 1,005 deaths identified by Reuters total 44% more than 700 reported by Amnesty International at the end of 2016, despite the news agency's use of stricter criteria in determining which incidents to count. Taser says the tallies give an exaggerated picture of the weapon's hazards because they suggest Taser caused all those deaths, when most involved other types of police force as well. The devices have saved tens of thousands of lives, the company says. All weapons carry risks, said Steve Tuttle, the company's vice president for communications. But tasers are the safest force option available to law enforcement. Doesn't that sound familiar? But they're out of control. We have to shock them and strap them down on a 4-point board because it's for their own good. Sound familiar? It should. Tuttle also said the autopsy results collected by Reuters are unreliable because they were not peer-reviewed, as standard for studies published in medical journals, although not applicable in courts of law. Fair enough. That's a fair enough argument. The medical examiners and pathologists around the country who decide the official cause of death in those cases may not understand the weapon's physiological effects, he said, and may be overlisting potential factors in their rulings to avoid being criticized for possible omissions. Electricity running through your body increases heart rate. When your heart rate increases over a certain amount, you go into cardiac arrest. Why do I know this? Because my mom used to have what we call tachycardia, where her heart would just randomly out of nowhere start going way too fast. At one point in her life, while I was in high school, her heart rate increased so much that she went into cardiac arrest. So we had to get her to the hospital, and this ended up happening twice to her. And they had to put her on a medication and eventually give her ablation. Why do I mention this? Electricity increased heartbeat. A heartbeat increased too much causes cardiac arrest. It's not that hard to put together. Just say. Ultimately, Taser is not responsible for educating every medical examiner on the subtleties of electrocution, Tuttle said. Really? That's interesting. No, but it is your duty to present all potential risks on any item that your police officers are carrying, just like anybody else who makes a product. My God, a freaking cigarette pack has the Surgeon General's warning on it. But we're not going to do that for police weapons? Really? No wonder my dad was disgusted with the force by the time he left it. And this is a map here where there has been Taser deaths. After Reuters explained its findings to Taser, the company sent an alert to law enforcement groups summarizing some of the central points of this series, describing them as not new and promising to provide key resources to repudiate the reports. Now, we're not going to actually, correct our actions and inform our customers of the risks involved using one of our products. We're not going to let them know how in certain situations it might not be best to employ those weapons because it could end up in death. No, we're just going to help you argue. It's got JRC apology written all over it. Taser International, which acquired the stun gun technology in the 1900s, changed its name in April to Avon Enterprise Incorporated. The new name, the company said, reflects its expanding business mission, including police body cameras and software used to manage evidence. Mental health and tasers. Taser won immense popularity for its devices through a singular marketing focus. Instead of resorting to lethal gunfire or potentially dangerous physical confrontations, it told police departments they could control combative subjects with a paralyzing stun. Yet, as the cases explored by Reuters reveal, stun gun encounters can turn deadly. Often those killed include people struggling with mental illness, emotional breakdowns, or seizure disorders. This is why folks out here in Missouri, many years later after my dad was off of the force and passed away, unfortunately, they had folks like me go out and train local and statewide police about how to handle situations with people who had mental health issues or neurological disabilities. Just saying. Now, granted, we still had taser deaths, but not nearly as many. Especially not in the Southwest region, where I had a hand in making sure those police officers were trained and that they can train the others. Encounters with such people have become more frequent as cuts in government-funded mental health services have thrust police into the role of first responders for those in psychological crisis. 1 in every 100 police calls involve a person with a mental health disorder, according to research by the American Psychiatric Association. Too often, experts say, officers see tasers as a go-to weapon in those circumstances. Cops have been turned to into mental health workers on the street, said Ken Wallentine, a former chief of law enforcement for the Utah Attorney General, who advises police departments on use of force. I fear that some police training and some police practices have allowed the crowding out of persuasion, he said. And the taser has become the default tool because they're police, not mental health workers. There's a lot of wrong going on there, and a lot of disability and mental health issues all wrapped up into one, but that's going to be for another day. Under the law, it's up to police departments, not the manufacturer, to mandate when cops should deploy stun guns. A handful of states, such as Connecticut, have codified general rules of use. Some federal courts have held that tasers should only be used on actively aggressive subjects, a view being adopted by a growing number of departments. And the Police Executive Research Forum, a law enforcement think tank, advises against using tasers on persons in medical mental crisis, but police policies vary widely. Taser itself has sent mixed messages about using its weapon on the mentally ill. Readers found an examination of legal findings and hundreds of pages of warnings and training materials issued by the company over the past 15 years. When tasers began gaining popularity with the police in the early 2000s, the company touted the weapons as an effective and relatively safe way to control people suffering a mental health crisis or intoxicated by drugs or alcohol. Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Somebody is already having issues due to drugs, and you're going to. Yeah. Moving on. We did see those potential uses of the device, Taser President Rick Smith said in a 2007 disposition. Materials provided to police trainers in 2004, Taser said that its stun gun was becoming widely accepted as the premier tool for police units that deal with emotionally disturbed persons. In recent years, the company has been more cautionary. Taser issued revised training materials in 2013 that advised police to avoid shocking someone who's actually perceived to be mentally ill. So they can do that, but the JRC, oh no, it's perfectly safe. Feels like a bee sting. Really? But the guidance offered on the 66 slide and 231 slide user course presentation was characterized as a liability consideration, not a safety issue. The company's official warnings to law enforcement make no mention of people with mental illness. Instead, they caution against tasers on people who exhibit extreme agitation or bizarre behavior. Don't those descriptions sound familiar? It is the JRC go to. So you have a company that actually produces police tasers, stun guns, saying to not use it on those who have extreme agitation or bizarre behavior. And then you have the JRC, who uses a device that is way more milliamps than these stun guns. 45 milliamps to be exact. And that is exactly what they use it for, what they say they use it for all the time to justify them using the device. Think about that for a minute. Just think about that. For police on the street, figuring out who meets the criteria can be daunting, officers and police lawyers say. Assessing someone's mental state on the fly is one of the most difficult things an officer has to do. Eric Carlson, a training and counseling officer at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Santiago Mota, the Ontario, California police officer who fired the taser against Schrock, said in a disposition he was unaware Schrock was mentally ill upon arriving at the family's home. The police dispatcher had listed the call as a 5150 hold code for a forced detention for a mental evaluation. Mota said he missed the alert. By the time I'm arriving, I don't hear a 5150, Mota said. After being stunned, Schrock went into the ventricular fibrillation, a condition marked by a vividly erratic heartbeat. He died 7 days later. The coroner found he had an array of heart problems, some likely exacerbated by a period of methamphetamine use 2 decades earlier, when he was caught making the drug and sentenced to probation. Schrock, a hospital technician for much of his working life, was a gentle father who frequently took his children on camping trips and hikes when they were younger. Nancy said, I mean that was the love of my wife, the father of my children, and my life will never be the same again, she said. The Ontario Police Department declined to discuss the case or make Moto available for interview. Taser spokesman Toto acknowledged the concerns about the using the company's weapons on the mentally ill. Yeah, there are at-risk groups, and that is why we identify them, Toto told readers. The use of tasers on people in mental health crises certainly is a topic that is out there. Okay, so there are a lot of issues to cover in this, way more than we have time for this morning. But the point of this particular video is, if this organization and if police departments can recognize that police stun guns should not be used in situations with people with mental health issues or neurological disabilities, in spite of whether they're acting aggressive or with bizarre behavior. Why can't the JRC? Why can't the JRC? Because what do we always hear? What is their apologia to us every single time? But these are the worst of the worst. They're out of control. They are harming themselves and others. We've heard it time and time and time again, right? Fact of the matter is, the majority of their students are not guilty of those offenses and not shocked for those offenses, but that's their go-to, right? We've seen it in media release after media release from them. Ad nauseum. Ad nauseum. The device that they use, the GED 4A, is 45 milliamps of electricity. The stun guns that are referred to in this reader's article here runs on 4 to 5 milliamps. What does that tell you? And then the JRC are going to sit there and try to tell you that it's just the bee sting and that the students aren't afraid of it. Think about this article here. Think about what we know of the JRC. And I ask you to come to your own conclusions. And my big question is, if the police and a taser company understand the dangers of using items like this against those who have mental health issues and those with disabilities, why is it so hard for the general public and the JRC to understand? And on that note, we're going to go ahead and close out the video this morning. We don't get very many views on this channel, especially on the subject of the JRC. The few that we do tend to get removed from time to time. So folks, please don't forget to hit that like button. Hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time this morning. And as always, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.